A listener writes in. She has some big news to share. After listening to an episode of Crossing the Line, in which I encouraged listeners to enter their DNA into the popular genealogy databases to help solve cold cases, she uploaded hers and, wouldn't you know, that one courageous act changes everything. My name is M. William Phelps. I'm an investigative journalist and the true crime author of close to 50 books. I've dedicated the past 20 years of my life to helping families of the missing and murdered. Join me. We're crossing the line. It's September 25th, 1988. There's a man out strolling along Highway 474 just west of Orlando, Florida. It's a beautiful day. Typical Florida heat. Lots of sunshine, a heavy humidity in the air. The man moves slowly, scanning the brush with his eyes in search of cypress wood. He likes to build lawn furniture out of the stuff. Heading down into a gulch, digging through some heavy foliage, fairly far away from the road, after coming upon several pieces of what is gorgeous wood, he sees something that immediately grabs his attention. He walks up closer and leans down. In front of him is the decomposed, mummified remains of what appears to be a young woman. The area where the body is discovered is off the beaten path, and it's clear that she had been dragged into the marshy area known as Green Swamp, and not necessarily murdered there. Standing in the gulch where the body is, the area is shielded from the road, indicating that this might be some sort of dumping ground. So what this is, if you can picture it, it's not like somebody pulled over on the road and just threw the body out of the car. The murderer had to carry this body down into the marsh and kind of place it there, out of the way. The remains, of course, are sent in to be autopsied. Investigators believe immediately that she has been viciously sexually assaulted and murdered. She was wearing a greenish-blue tank top and a denim skirt. Her pantyhose had been partially removed, kind of pulled down. She has no identification, no purse, no jewelry, and no shoes. 2 weeks to 8 months, investigators are told. That is the best guess as to how long she has been out there. Upon further investigation, the pathologist confirms they are definitely looking at a murder, yet oddly, several injuries found on her ribs, cheekbone, and nose seem to be older, bones that have been broken and then had time to heal. Her remains are too decomposed to figure out a cause of death, but everyone is certain they are looking at a homicide and, as I said, a vicious, brutal sexual assault. They also notice the woman has breast implants and are able to date them back to 1985 or before. And that can become important. You track down the number, find out the hospital where she got the surgery, you might get a name. She weighs about 150 pounds. She was between 5 feet 9 inches and 5 feet 11 inches tall. She'd also had extensive plastic surgery beyond the implants. They even think, after the immediate examination, based on what is called pitting of the pelvis, that she had likely given birth at some point in her life. As the weeks pass, and her DNA is submitted for possible identification to the limited law enforcement databases available at the time, investigators wait and wait and wait, but nothing comes back. Months pass. Nothing. Not a word regarding who she could be. Not a clue from the crime scene. Not a match from any of the missing person databases. Years go by, and it's clear that the woman in the marsh will remain a Jane Doe, as she is named until either technology or science catch up with the case. A witness comes forward, or perhaps Jane Doe's murder is resigned to the thousands of unsolved cases across the country that are never solved. During the 1980s and 1990s, Florida was a hotbed of serial killer activity all over the state. Psychopaths preying on female victims from widely diverse backgrounds. I've done plenty of those cases on Crossing the Line over the years. Moreover, the number of murders in Florida then was almost double what it is today. I have been in pathology departments in Florida and have stood among walls of boxes filed on shelves like books, with numbers written on the front of the boxes. The nameless remains of unidentified dead people. It's a sad, sad reminder of how many families out in the world do not have the closure of burying a loved one and having a place to honor that person's life. I mean, it overwhelmed me just seeing all these boxes, knowing that these people are missing, that there are families out there wondering where this person in the box is. As time moves forward, the Orlando Marsh Jane Doe would settle in among myriad unidentified remains. It just doesn't look like it's going to happen. Now let's fast forward to 2015. 27 years after she had been found, a discovery reignites interest in Jane Doe's case and, through that process, renames her, not by her birth name, because she remains unidentified, but an appropriate name considering who she actually is. Law enforcement had believed since the day her remains were found that Jane Doe was cisgender, meaning her gender identity matched the sex assigned to her at birth. But that changes after a test is done and it is confirmed that Jane Doe has both XY chromosomes, proving that she was born a male, but at some point in her life had transitioned. Add the cosmetic surgeries and implants and positive tests for hormone replacement medications, and investigators are now certain she had transitioned into a female from a male. The medications, which can cause pelvic bone changes, had thrown them off when considering that at one time she had given birth. This discovery could help the investigation into not only who she is, but who might have murdered her. As several different agencies get involved, along with a group of students interested in helping to identify her, Jane Doe becomes Julie Doe, a name given to her, several reports claim, because of the LGBTQ-themed movie To Wong Fu, Thanks for Everything, Julie Newmar. Theories of who she is and where she's from begin to mount. You'd think investigators might have a slight edge based on the fact that she is transgender. Going through all of the reported missing person cases and finding those families with a missing transgender female could narrow things down some. But after doing this, they come up with nothing. Throughout this time, there are many groups, investigators, civilians, and others, working to help identify Julie Doe. There was a concerted effort among many to bring closure to this case and make sure Julie Doe found her way back home. The Trans Doe Task Force then comes out and says submitting DNA into the popular online databases, GEDmatch, 23andMe, etc., might help identify missing and murdered people and provide that person's birth name, but it does run the risk of what is called dead naming, or in other words, referring to a transgender or non-binary person by their birth name after they have chosen a new name, especially those wishing to keep their former name private. All of this keeps the focus on identifying Julie Doe. Still, several additional years go by and investigators are no closer to identifying her than they were on day one. Now fast forward to 2024. A listener of mine, Laura, is facing the fight of her life, a major health battle. Laura is articulate, soft-spoken, and extremely passionate about victims' advocacy.
I just remembered the whole reason why I actually uploaded my DNA to GEDmatch, and I wanted to share in life's little victories, and I think that this was a huge one, and I just thought that you would really like to know that people are out there listening to you and you are making a difference with what you're telling us. So, and that's why I decided to reach out. I wanted to let you know that because of your podcast, I uploaded my DNA to GEDmatch, and because of that, the Jane Doe Project reached out to me. I just wanted to let you know that you had a big part in that.
I think you know where this one's going. But let's take a break here, come back, and hear more from Laura, specifically how she heard she was connected to a woman found in a Florida marsh before Laura was even born. Be right back. I think it's important to get to know Laura a little bit, who she is, where she's from, and most importantly, how that one decision she made has changed so many lives and given a woman her name back.
Originally from Texas, but I currently live in Charleston, South Carolina. I am technically still a small business owner. I have a little jewelry making business, and so that's kind of why I was listening to your podcast. I mean, while I was just, working all day in my studio, I love listening to true crime podcasts, and Crossing the Line and also Paper Ghosts were two of my favorites.
As it happened, a few years ago, I produced a few episodes of Crossing the Line centered around forensic genetic genealogy. I interviewed one of the country's premier DNA genetic genealogists, Dr. Claire Glenn, a good friend who is a professor of forensic science and the director of the Graduate Certificate in Forensic Genetic Genealogy, a master's course Claire actually designed at the Henry C. Lee Institute of Forensic Science in West Haven, Connecticut, where Dr. Claire Glenn is also now the assistant director. We spoke about the importance of people voluntarily submitting their DNA into the popular online genealogy sites to potentially help solve cold case murders, identify missing people, and give nameless victims, either from tragic unexplained deaths, random deaths, and of course cold case unsolved murders, back their names. Laura had heard those episodes of the show and actually took the advice and submitted her DNA. And then she forgot about it. Laura, it should be said, knew absolutely nothing about the Julie Doe case when she submitted her DNA.
I listened to your podcast about uploading to GEDmatch, and I went ahead and did it. I didn't hear anything, right away. I just kind of forgot about it. And then last November, while I was visiting family in Texas for Thanksgiving, I get an email from an investigator, and he said he was with the Jane Doe Project, that I was about 40 centimorgans match, so a very distant relative to a Jane Doe. And he said you can Google her, Julie Doe, 1988, to find out more about her story. You can also reach out to this certain detective down in Florida who's in charge of the case. But listening to so much true crime, and listening to your podcast, I already knew about the Jane Doe Project. I felt like it was legit. And I was like, absolutely, like, whatever you need, just let me know. So it kind of just started from there. We started emailing back and forth, and he wanted to know what DNA service I used in order to upload to GEDmatch. I said 23andMe.
So that conversation begins with the investigator, and Laura is at first a bit standoffish, as if this cannot be happening. After talking with the investigator again, she realizes that by submitting her DNA to the database, she might be the one piece of the puzzle investigators had been missing in identifying a cold case murder victim, Julie Doe. We all know this, but I think I should say it. For investigators, finding out who a person is can jumpstart an investigation into who killed that person. You know, that old victimology paradigm we talk about on the show from time to time. Once you have an identification, you can begin to branch out into that person's world and understand their travels and relationships near the time they were murdered. Random murders are, as you all know, very rare. People are murdered 8 out of 10 times, maybe even a bit more, by someone they either know personally or have some sort of connection to. Even though after years, genealogists working on Julie Doe's case had made it all the way up the family tree and landed on Laura, there was still loads of hard work ahead. They now knew of a family connection at some point between Laura and Julie Doe. They just didn't yet know where those family branches intersected and crossed paths, which would ultimately tell them, if they got lucky, who Julie Doe is.
Then we decided that Ancestry.com would be the best way in order to help them figure out, who this Julie Doe could possibly be based on family tree. So they sent me a free Ancestry DNA kit.
Forensic Investigative Genetic Genealogy, or FIG as it's called, is tedious, arduous work. And I just want to defer back to Dr. Claire Glenn's description of the course she created, wrote, and teaches to explain how this works a little bit. Claire spells it out clearly, explaining how the program she designed explores advanced DNA testing methods for genetic genealogy purposes with the goal, an important word here, of harvesting probative information from biological evidence to infer genetic relatedness between individuals. So, in other words, taking samples found at crime scenes and samples from people investigators discover, or people like Laura who submit their DNA to databases, and comparing those samples to one another in search of matches is how it works. But that's just the beginning. It gives you the connection, the road to travel on, but not the name of that road. There are many more steps and tools involved to then forge connections between genetic matches, family and relatives identified in the public genetic genealogy databases approved for use by law enforcement, and actual individuals and their namesakes. Sounds like a lot of science, I understand. But from that point, you have to then find documented evidence and build out family trees, which is where the real labor comes into play. And this is my point with all of the science. You roll up your sleeves, you sit down at a table, and you start going through all of these records. Look, lab work is lab work. This part of it involves marriage and birth records, immigration papers, death records, and other documented paperwork connecting people related to one another together. And we are talking here 5, 6, even 10 degrees of separation between people. Those in your family tree, not only you do not know, but have no idea even exist. Like I said, this is really tedious, hard work. You put your head down into the research and you just study it. You look for connections. Think of it this way, not quite searching for a needle in a haystack, but certainly a needle in a junk drawer full of miscellaneous items that look like needles. You're becoming a historian, basically, trying to figure out a common link among everyone within a massive family tree spanning continents and generations dating back really as far as records go. In early 2025, after law enforcement makes that connection between Laura's DNA ancestry and their Julie Doe, it's clear that somewhere along the family line, Laura and Julie Doe are connected. Now they just have to find out where. So they talked to Laura about next steps. This is after they had sent Laura that Ancestry DNA kit.
I did the kit, sent it back. Took about 2 weeks for the results to come back. I want to say end of December, maybe early January. Everything was set up on my Ancestry.com. And then another person from the Jane Doe Project contacted me. And then I just shared my family tree with them on ancestry.com, and then I didn't hear anything from them. Obviously, I did a deep dive into ancestry.com, spent hours researching family tree. I feel like I'm related to every single person on the Eastern Seaboard. That's how many people are in the tree. So
you hear what Laura says there? It's actually very funny, but it does give you a sense of just how vast and close connections we all share to one another are. Human beings share 99.9% of their DNA. Strangers, 99.9% of their DNA is the same. Our genetic material is identical with the exception of 0.01%, which is where investigators rule out people. The goal here is to narrow all of this down and find out where and how Julie Doe and Laura connect, which should in turn give law enforcement a namesake to then begin to investigate and find out which one of those family members is missing. Let me take a final break here and then introduce you to Laura's very distant relative and give back to this woman known as Julie Doe her proper name. If true crime is part of your daily routine, check out this podcast, Morning Cup of Murder. Every single day, Karina B. Mastifer delivers a new true crime case. No banter, no fluff, just straight to the story. With over 2,000 episodes and 40 million downloads, there's a reason listeners keep going back. Some cases you'll recognize, others you won't, but you'll always be engaged. So if you need a true crime quick fix, search for Morning Cup of Murder wherever you get your podcasts and add it to your lineup of shows. I just want to read a quote. The team faced just about every possible hurdle, from unknown parentage, matches who were adopted, and endogamy, which is basically inbreeding. That quote is from Trans Doe Task Force co-leader Eric Hendershot during an interview with WHAS-11 ABC News. He was speaking about the genealogy search for Julie Doe once they had Laura in the picture, adding, even up to the end, when we suspected that she was adopted, the team was stuck. Adoption is the one major obstacle when you get into the investigative end of forensic genetic genealogy work, because adoption records are private and unavailable to genealogists. As it turns out, when she was 5 years old, Julie Doe had been adopted. Of all the places, based on that DNA submitted by Laura, investigators finally tracked down Julie Doe's direct lineage to Kentucky, a place Laura had actually never been and never considered to have any family. As volunteers dug through research in the Fayette County, Kentucky Records Department, they found what investigative genetic genealogist Lance Daly told ABC were two names of two key relatives who were crucial to unraveling the mystery. I want to acknowledge that before Laura was even involved in the case, long before she had even submitted her DNA to the database, over a 5-year period, 50 volunteers laid the groundwork to solve Julie Doe's case, effectively setting the table for a lead like Laura's DNA to help resolve things. So I don't want to give the impression that it's like bang, snap of the fingers, Laura submits her DNA and the case is solved. It took years and hundreds of work hours to get the case to a place where Laura's act of selflessness was able to make it all possible. Julie Doe's name is Pamela Leigh Walton. She grew up with an adopted family in Kentucky. Before she turned 25, she had already changed her name and, reports indicate, likely had gender affirmation surgery and began taking hormones. The sad part of her case, that is beyond Pamela's murder, becomes that she was not accepted by her community. She was called horrible names and bullied because of the identity she chose. Laura got a call in March 2025.
He said they just did a press release saying how they have identified the Julie Doe and that it's Pamela Walton. And so I Googled it and...
Interestingly, Laura says, she has no idea how it all came back to her.
I don't know how they did it. I'd love to know one day, how I am distantly related to Pamela Walton.
It felt good, she adds, to play a small role in helping to identify an unidentified murder victim and get the ball rolling on finding out who killed Pamela Leigh Walton.
They released her identity, and that's when I emailed you. I was like, this is amazing. I'm part of the true crime story, and I actually did something in order to help. There's so many people out there listening who are like, how can I help? How can I help? You can help by uploading your DNA to GEDmatch. And so I did it. And here I am, part-time crime solver. That's how I feel.
All kidding aside, I asked Laura how the entire case, knowing that she is related to Pamela, even if only in some remote way, changed her outlook.
My heart just really went out to her. No one deserves to be murdered. No one deserves to be murdered in the way that she was. The details of the story, obviously they misidentified her as born a woman, and then doing the DNA and then finding out that she was transgendered. I can only imagine what a transgendered person was going through in 1988, because I'm sure it was even more difficult for her to be able to be who she felt like she really wanted to be, and then to be murdered in such a brutal way. I don't know. My heart goes out to all the victims, but it just seemed like she had such a difficult time and such a difficult story just based on who she was and who she was trying to be, that of course I wanted to help. I think identifying a John or Jane Doe is the first step in helping to solve a crime, and whether or not her family, wanted to know about, what happened to her, it's just, I don't know, everybody has a basic human right of, justice and being identified and having their story told, and I think that hers was an important one.
That question Laura brought up about Pamela's family perhaps not wanting to find her, or not even really knowing she was missing, it is an important part of this story. There's some indication that Pamela was shunned by her family. In one comment made by the DNA Doe Project, the group at the center of identifying Pamela, during their research, investigators discovered something strange, and yet possibly very revealing. A pre-carved headstone with Pamela's former male name. Take from that information what you will. Maybe Pamela did it to bury her former name for good, or someone else did it to send her a message. On the flip side of it all, in death, Pamela Leigh Walton had scores of people she had never met or known fighting for her and caring about her, working tirelessly to identify her. And that work continues now as investigators begin searching for her killer. Pamela was definitely in Kentucky in late April 1988. I can verify that because I found evidence of her there as late as April 25th. So between then and September of that same year, Pamela made it down to Florida somehow and was then murdered. Or you'd have to consider she was brought down to Florida by her killer, who might have lived in Kentucky, where Pamela grew up and spent most of her brief life. This case is far from being closed. But I want to thank Laura for not only submitting her DNA into the databases, but also reaching out to me with her story. That's it for this week. Be safe. Be aware. Head over to patreon.com/MWilliamPhelps and sign up for my free content page, where I'll be interacting with you, doing live streams, posting exclusive content, and dropping a major limited series podcast exclusively for Patreon members later this year. That's patreon.com/M. William Phelps. patreon.com/M. William Phelps. Sources for this episode include Kentucky woman's 1988 murder case finally solved after 36 years by Zan Dorsey, WHAS 11 ABC News, March 12th, 2025. And, of course, my conversations with Laura, whose last name I chose to hold back to protect her identity. Crossing the Line is executive produced by M. William Phelps, LLC, and Matthew Valentinus, Mom's Basement Management. Written by me, M. William Phelps. Audio mastering and mixing by Matt Russell. Music by Epidemic Sound. Original music written and performed by Thomas Mooney, Tom Phelps, and Matt Russell.